मतलब लो।
अच्छा, मेरी अक्षत से बेटर है इसका मतलब। तो मतलब मैं इंट्रोडक्शन दे सकता हूँ।
अक्षित से तो बेटर ही है। अक्षित की तो बहुत अभी वो आ रही थी, मतलब धीमी सी आ रही थी वो।
भाई क्वेश्चन कहाँ डालना है?
अरे भाई, पूछना एंड में।
नहीं, हम तुम लोग सुनाई देता कि नहीं, टेस्ट करता था।
भाई भाई अब रुक जाओ। लाइव स्ट्रीम ऑन कर दिया तो ज्यादा वो मत बोलो।
अच्छा।
हाँ, ये अच्छा ठीक है, ये लो लिंक भेज दिया, ठीक है, जूम चैट पे।
अच्छा।
का ओके।
अब मैं तेरे को को होस्ट बना दूं या होस्ट, बता।
अगर आप मेरे को अगर आप मेरे को होस्ट बनाओगे तो यूट्यूब लाइव फिर भी चलेगा।
ओ अच्छा, तो को होस्ट बना दे, ठीक है।
तुम और मेरे को प्लीज वो दे दो कि बस वो सब कैसे करना है, क्योंकि एक मैंने वो तो कर ही दिया है कि वेटिंग रूम में डाल दिया सबको।
वेटिंग रूम तेरे को दिख रहा है ना? ये अच्छा ठीक है, ये लो लिंक। भव्या,
हाँ जी।
वेटिंग रूम तेरे को दिख रहा है ना? तू एडमिट कर सकता है ना?
हाँ जी। हाँ जी।
हाँ।
हाँ, मैं एडमिट कर सकता हूँ ये नहीं पता, पर हाँ वेटिंग रूम दिख रहा है।
हाँ तो नहीं, एडमिट का ऑप्शन आ रहा है ना बंदे के
हाँ, अब आ
राइट
रहा है,
साइड।
अब आ रहा है, हाँ अब आ रहा है।
हाँ हाँ सही है, फिर और कुछ चाहिए तो बता।
नहीं बस।
कॉल
थैंक यू
कर दी।
बहुत ज़्यादा। हाँ जी, हाँ जी।
मैंने रिकॉर्डिंग भी स्टार्ट कर दी है, ठीक है।
थैंक यू।
चल बाय।
बाय।
भेज दिया, ठीक है। मैंने रिकॉर्डिंग भी
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hey, George, how are you? Thanks for joining me.
Thanks.
Thanks for helping us out.
Sure. So people are still joining, I take it.
They are all in the waiting room, so I'll admit them at 5:30 exactly. So we have time before that. I've started the YouTube live stream as well as recording. Yeah, I can hear you.
So the last time I did this on Zoom, what was happening was there was a delay between slide changing.
I think that should be fine now because there are only like 50 participants in this Zoom call, and others are joining in on the YouTube live stream.
Okay.
Oh, it's live streaming right now and it's recording too. So I'll send the link is in the group chat if you want. I'll send it again.
So let me know when I can do a test of my presentation by sharing it.
Yeah, you can test right now. They'll join in around 5:30, so we have 7 minutes.
Okay, you have disabled the screen sharing.
For participants, sorry, I think. Yeah, sorry, it's on now. I'll make you a co-host just a second.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
you're a
right.
co-host.
All right. Good. Let's see.
Yeah, I can see your screen now.
All right. And if I go to presentation, you see it now still?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, good. How many people are you expecting?
I'm only allowing the organizers to join in, so it should be fine.
Okay, I see 21. So maybe afterwards you can, or maybe you got a few minutes to tell me a little bit about your organization.
So it's a student chapter of ACM, that is Association of Computer Machinery, and the ACM for Women chapters is also co-hosting it with us, and it's done for a college called Salazar College of Engineering in Bangalore.
Okay, and you're at Carnegie Mellon?
Oh no, the host is actually has the email from Carnegie Mellon. He just got admitted into it.
Okay. So I guess I don't know if I shared with you that sometimes the audio right now you're coming in a little distorted, but I think writing the notes down on chat will make things a lot faster, in my opinion. That's been what my experience has been. Is to, in fact, I was in a webinar yesterday, and it was the United States, and we were having all kinds of issues, and we just started to write questions on chat. And It worked great.
The questions they'll ask in the end, and it will be in the chat itself. So there will be written questions.
Okay.
So I can admit them when you feel it's fine. George, I can admit them when you're ready. So just give me a go sign.
Good morning.
Good morning, George.
So it's what time over there in Australia?
It's 10 o'clock.
Oh, wow. Bedtime.
Exactly.
Well, yeah. All right. I'm gonna stop sharing video and get back over here. I think we're gonna be starting pretty soon. So hope you enjoy it.
Thank you so much. Quite excited to be here.
Yeah.
George, just give me a go sign when you're ready, so I'll admit everyone.
I'm sorry, what?
Just give me a go sign when you're ready. I'll admit everyone then.
Okay. So you can just say a few words and then you're coming in a little distorted, but we'll I'll try to sync up with when you tell me I can start talking.
Or shall we start admitting the participants in? That's what I'm saying.
morning or good evening, wherever you are right now. So, uh, today we are gathered here for a talk by George Salazar from NASA. And George Salazar received his Bachelor's of Science in Electrical Engineering from the University of Houston and his Master's of Science in Systems Engineering from Southern Methodist University. He is currently serving as the Human Computing Interface Technical Discipline Lead at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. He has been involved with the design of advanced telemetry, speech recognition, and intelligence systems. He has contributed to nearly every major American manned space initiative, I think, including the recent one. He has left his mark on the shuttle program, the ISS, and is widely recognized for his education outreach initiatives. With so much to his accomplishments, it gives me immense happiness to have Salazar give us a brief talk on the systems engineering side of ISS, the Artemis program, and a lot more. I also would like to thank Bhavya for organizing this. And I'm just providing the Zoom meeting message.
Okay, thank you. So let me see if I can share my screen here. Yeah, okay, so I'm still sharing. And I'm going to go to presentation mode. All right, can everybody see, can you see that? Everybody see the first slide? Can you see the first slide?
Not right now. I think the screen sharing has turned off right now. Can you try to reshare the screen?
All right.
Yep, it's
All right,
yeah.
All right. So let me go to. Can you still see it? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Seems like when I go into presentation mode, I lose the audio. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
Even in the presentation.
Okay, and you can see the present.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Good. All right. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what part of the world you're at. I'm very happy to share some knowledge here with you guys, and the presentation is Road to NASA. So basically, here's the agenda. And so in the beginning, basically, it's about me, just a very short story. It's always good to know who's speaking, why should I listen to that person and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to talk just a very brief about my background, my schooling, my NASA career. Not all of my NASA career, because I think that's an all-day event, but I'll share a little bit with you, some highlights anyway. And then gaining knowledge in my career. That's something that I like to give back to students, especially, is what I learned over the years, and maybe some tough times and what have you. So I'll talk about some of the knowledge that I gained in my career and some things that I found very useful. I might just say a few words about what I learned in school and did it benefit me. And then I'm going to shift gears a little bit, because as you see, the title is Road to NASA. So I'm going to talk a little bit about future space exploration missions and what we have on our drawing board, if you will, about some of our human spaceflight missions. I'm not going to be talking robotic. I'm not going to talk about Mars laboratory robots or James Webb Telescope. I'm going to focus more on the human space flight because that's the area that I'm in. NASA's involved with both human space flight as well as unmanned satellites and exploration like robots to Mars and things of that sort. So those are other groups, but NASA Johnson Space Center is mostly focused on human spaceflight. And then a few final words. So going from point A to point B for some people is a straight line. And, I've known a few people like that. In high school, there was one lady that she wanted to become a doctor in high school. And I think she was a sophomore at the time. And guess what? She became a doctor, and she practiced in the Dallas area in Texas for many years. And there are some people that kind of deviates a little bit, from a straight line, but for the most part, they go from A to B. Mine was a little crooked. It was all over the place. Going from A to B. Some areas I didn't expect. Some areas I was hoping for. But in the end, I got to point B, and that was at that time when I wanted to go back to school. Was I was really looking for a stable job. And that was because of growing up, somewhat parents that had unstable jobs. So I'm the product of the ghettos of Corpus Christi, Texas. And what you see there is a house. It's called a shotgun house. It's probably about 14 feet wide by 25 feet deep. It had only 3 rooms in it: living room, 1 bedroom, and the kitchen. The bathroom was outside in a little house, so we call the outhouse. So very modest house. Sometimes there were as many as 12 people in that house. Got a little crowded, but we were able to live well. Basically live well there. Not too far from there was where I consider my engineering training ground, and that was a junkyard that wasn't too far away from the house. And so I learned a lot of things and used a lot of things that I found there to build things. One thing we built was a tree house, and of course, I didn't know anything about structural mechanics and how many nails and strength and materials and all that. We just built, and the first tree house we built, it fell apart when we tried to get in there. It was a disaster, but luckily nobody got hurt. So I got introduced to electricity through learning how to operate or how to use a toaster, and it was messed up. But I wanted to learn how come the toast popped up, and I almost got shocked. Well, I did get shocked. I didn't get electrocuted, but that was my introduction to electricity. Maybe that's what made me become an electrical engineer. I'm not sure. You're seeing those little toy soldiers there. So what does that mean? Well, I was a big fan of Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Atom Man, all those superheroes. And of course, when I was growing up, we didn't have money, so I made my own out of soldiers. And I would use bubble gum to build up their muscles, and then I would paint them. So I had a Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman. Now, guess what? Because these soldiers are supposed to be male, right? So one of those soldiers became Wonder Woman. So it's one of the early transvestites of that time. But anyway, it was fun doing all that. I enjoyed the learning and the creativity. I learned to shine shoes when I was in elementary. You can see there a shoe box that my uncle built for me. And, that's how I made some of my money was shining shoes. Now, this is before my dad bought a donut shop. He was able to buy one. And so I learned how to make donuts at the age of 10. And I ran the donut shop at age 16 while going to school because my dad had suffered a heart attack. So there you see me. What you don't see is my mom holding the other side of the rolling pin, but at that time, I was a teenager and I cut that picture out because, how teenagers sometimes are with parents. You don't want to be seen with your parents. So anyway, that's me running the donut shop at the age of 16 and still going to school. So in schooling, I graduated 473 out of 605. So I was in the lower 20%. We moved to Houston after a hurricane had devastated Corpus Christi. And in Houston, I worked different jobs. I worked in construction, sold books door to door. I went back to working donuts, Shipley Donuts, and I also worked at Kmart. So different kinds of jobs, and I started to see this was not going to be the life for me at the age of getting up in age and what have you. So I wanted to go back to school and make a career change. It was difficult. I tried getting into electronics because I always found that very interesting. And so I applied to become a Xerox copier tech representative. And there you see a picture of a Xerox copier. When I took the test, they gave it to me, and it was made up of a lot of what's called digital electronic circuits and truth tables that you see there. I had no clue what that was. Yeah, I mean, it could have been written in Chinese for all I know, and I wouldn't have known the difference. I failed, to say the least. And I tried the same thing with IBM. And I did well in the electrical part, but the mechanical part, I didn't do as well. Anyway, I didn't let that stop me. And I returned to college trying to basically figure out how to do that. And it was either failure or success. I had poor SAT scores, and it was very challenging I realized going back to school. So that was a junior college that took me on a probation basis. It was a 2-year college. I got my electronics technology degree there. And after I got my 2-year degree, I transferred over to the University of Houston. And I first started out in the College of Technology. And I felt like I wasn't being challenged enough. And luckily, I came across an organization that basically helped me cope with university life because it was just overwhelming. The University of Houston at that time was about 36,000 students, and the junior college I went to, there was only 3,000 students, and I was completely lost. Anyway, this organization helped me, guided me through the university. But one thing that they did point out was, hey, if I want to be challenged, then join engineering. And I did, and it was very challenging, I have to say. But interesting enough, about 21 years later, I graduated with my master's in systems engineering. And there's several reasons for that. One was that I wanted to start making money. And that's why I didn't go straight to go get my master's. And then the second thing was I had been told early on that you should get some experience before getting your advanced degree. And for me, that was the right choice. But along the way, I was gaining experience in electronics. So I worked at Canon calculators. Some people know Canon calculators, or Canon, the product name Canon, for cameras. And one time they made what they call business calculators and business computers. And so I got a part-time job working as an electronics technician. And so if you see over here to the right-hand side, there's a picture of 2 probes, and that's part of a multimeter. And then you see the chopsticks. Well, what's the relationship here? Well, the Japanese technician saw that I was trying to probe circuitry by using 2 hands. He said, no, use chopstick method, much faster and frees up your hand. And sure enough, he was right. I used to use the chopstick method for that. On weekends, I would practice chopstick method by going to Chinese restaurants and practicing picking up peas and small pieces of rice. And during school, we have internships, especially in engineering. And so one of them that just got my attention was NASA, and I applied to be an intern at NASA, but my grade point average wasn't high enough. So I got declined, but Geosource took me, and they put me in manufacturing engineering, developing what's called geophones. And what you're seeing here is a geophone that basically is used for seismic exploration or looking for oil, gas, and what have you. So basically the way these things work is they put thousands of these out in the field. And so there's this big vehicle, very heavy. It reminds me of an army tank that stomps the ground and the ground shakes. And so these things are on springs and they shake in accordance to how the ground is configured or how the ground looks. And so I was involved with developing these geophones. I got involved with robotics because we automated the line 2 as well. So it was a very interesting experience. Now, when I graduated from the University of Houston, I did not have a high GPA. Okay? I confess up to that. It was just a struggle dealing with some of that, what I call theoretical stuff. I was more of a practical person. And so, and I'm just going to just say a few more things about Geosource. I learned about fiber optics assembly, line robotics, data acquisition as well. But these 2 jobs were instrumental in me getting hired at NASA. And the reason I have to say that is because when NASA came to the University of Houston, I was competing with some guys that had perfect grade point average, 4.0s. And, they belonged to Tau Beta Pi, Eta Kappa Nu, all those honor societies or whatever. And I just wasn't there. So I was a little nervous, interviewing. But in the end, I got hired, and because Robert Brown, the guy that interviewed me and wanted me to come to NASA to interview, said that, I understand your grade point average is not all that fantastic, and your grades are decent. He said, but we're looking at people with some real world experience. One thing that he shared with me was that one of the reasons why the Apollo space program and we landed on the moon was so successful was because a lot of the engineers and scientists that worked on that program were experienced people. Something I didn't realize. And I got to meet some NASA engineers when I first started working at NASA. And they shared the same story with me. In fact, the gentleman that kind of guided me to systems engineering came from the oil industry before coming to work for NASA for the space program. And he became one of the best systems engineers that NASA had in the area of communications. So, I had the interview with 4 companies, including NASA. I almost didn't go work for NASA because one job was offering me a lot of money. And I was hungry, so I was kind of leaning toward that company. But when I went to go interview for NASA, the division chief was very adamant that he wanted me to come work for NASA. So long story short, I was convinced to come work for NASA for one area that I did not include in my criteria for a job, and that was stability. And NASA provided that stability. Once you become a civil servant, like I am right now, government employee, it's very hard to lay you off. It's very hard to fire you. It's not to say they can't, but it's very hard to. So there was a lot of stability in there. And, growing up with my dad getting laid off from job to job, sometimes, we didn't have money to eat food and whatever. That resonated with me, and so that was a big decisive factor. The reason I got the job at NASA was because two cooperative education students that usually are automatically offered jobs declined the offer. So they opened it up to the street, as they call it. And so there was one opportunity in the Houston, there was one opportunity that was available here and one opportunity available in the East Coast. And so I got one of the two opportunities. Let's see, opened the interview, Opportunity University where Jesse was interviewing. I was one of the 6 candidates for 2 positions in the Tracking Communication Division, Telemetry and Audio. That's where I first started, and I got that position. So let me talk a little bit about the NASA career. Here, I'm just going to talk real briefly about some of the projects that I've had over the years, and not all of them. So that right there is, you see a bunch of wiring and a bunch of electronic boxes. That's underneath the Space Shuttle payload bay. This was called the Modular Auxiliary Data System. I was responsible for that. It acquired signals from over 2,700 sensors: temperature, pressure, vibration, acoustics. These were parameters that were being measured on the Space Shuttle when they launched and returned to Earth. And all this data was captured and recorded on a what we call the MADS recorder. And we would take it there at the Johnson Space Center and analyze the data and talk to engineers about potential issues with the shuttle design, and we would have reviews and what have you. So it was a very interesting experience, and I learned a lot about wiring. You can see how neat that wiring is. It's what we call dressed up wiring. Very organized, very neat, very tightly organized. And that's the way real space wire is. You know, you see some of these sci-fi programs, and you know, you see wires all over the place, and I go, oh my gosh, you know, that's not real wiring. This should be real wiring. So anyway, that was a Modular Auxiliary Data System. Later, I got involved with voice command, speech recognition. This was an experiment for the first time ever of controlling a spacecraft by voice. And so I was a project engineer, design engineer, and systems engineer on that project. So basically what this box did was listen to commands from an astronaut and would activate cameras and tilt and pan cameras, select monitors, everything by voice. So it was a very interesting experience, and it was my introduction to human factors. I'll say a little more about that. But this was heavily involved with the human element. And of course, one thing that I learned very quickly was that the human, unlike hardware and software, is not very deterministic. You know, you have, it's very hard to understand the human sometimes, the behavior and what have you. Hardware and software, we understand that. They're very deterministic. So that was a very beneficial project for me. I learned a lot about working with people, learned a lot about spacecraft electronics and what have you. It was very beneficial. X-38, the experimental spacecraft, and I was involved with the flight computers, and this was very challenging for me because I had to go back and learn a little bit more about thermodynamics. I was working with avionics boxes that I was developing. They required a lot of heat dissipation, and so I had to deal with how we're going to conduct the heat away from the electronics, because I don't know if you've heard this, but heat is the enemy of electronics. And so you're always trying to get that heat away. So I started to get more and more involved with systems engineering, as you can imagine, of a complicated spacecraft, because one change to my box affected the change to many, many other subsystems. What you're seeing in there is some of the, that's a little display. I'm not sure you can see it, but there's a little display right there. And that little display is organic light emitting diode technology, and we were evaluating it. And I had the task of developing testing to see how well this would behave in the space environment, radiation environment, temperature environment, pressure environment. Right there is inside what we call a thermal vacuum chamber. And so it was interesting. It was kind of a fun project because it was what we call research and development, technology development. So I was very pleased and honored to have been chosen to try to understand that technology. So another beneficial aspect also to systems engineering, because it was very much involved with developing the right tests to capture the right data to answer the right questions. Cockpit avionics upgrade, that was a major undertaking of upgrading the space shuttle cockpit avionics upgrade. Lots of electronics involved. First time we ever used high-speed data networks on the shuttle. Very challenging, very demanding. Again, more systems engineering. And interesting enough, it was about this time that I was working on my systems engineering degree, because when I finally decided what should I major in and what should NASA pay for, because NASA paid for my master's degree, it was clearly that I wanted to do systems engineering. But I've also been involved with basically introducing human systems integration to NASA. And me and some other gentlemen from the Human Factors Group developed something what we call the Human Resource Group on Human Systems Integration. And it was basically to get the word out about the importance of human element in design of systems. If those of you that are out there studying engineering, I can tell you that you're just going to be learning about hardware and software. They're not going to talk about the human element unless you're majoring in maybe industrial engineering. Industrial engineering does cover human factors, but for the most part, you just work about you're only involved with the hardware and software development, but never consider the human. And I'll say a little bit more about that later. Right now, I've been working on SpaceX. That's a picture that you see down there at the bottom. That's the Dragon module. And then this is the CST-100 Starliner. That's the Boeing. Those two there at the bottom are commercial crew program. And you probably heard about the Demo 2 that launched this past Saturday. It was very successful. I was involved with that. I had responsibility for the control panel display. If you saw pictures of the Demo 2, you saw this real fancy blue displays in front of them. It looked like a jet airliner, and that was my responsibility. I was very happy and pleased that it worked out very well. So you see this little box called Cisco, and that was actually a little, it was a side job that I had consulting for a company that developed electric water heaters. And so all of my experience in electronic systems engineering was very beneficial in helping this company improve their product and sell more units. All right, so this is a proud moment in my career. This is where I'm getting my second patent. It was on reconfigurable fuzzy logic associated with, let's call it artificial intelligence. And John Young, who's only one of 12 astronauts that ever flew on the moon or walked on the moon, was there to present me the award, and it was a very humbling experience, to get the award from one of the best astronauts the Apollo program and even the space shuttle program had. John Young's the only astronaut that ever flew 3 different programs. He flew on Gemini, he flew on Apollo, and he flew on space shuttle. All right, so gaining knowledge in my career. So one thing that I started to learn very quickly, not taught in school, that about systems complexity. And in order to deal with system complexity, you got to have the right tools. And it's no different than if you're trying to, the analogy I give sometimes to students is if you're going to build a big house, you better have the right tools. You cannot build a house with just a screwdriver and a few nails. You got to have more than that. You got to have electric saw. You got to have a table saw. You got to have all kinds of tools that are necessary, for building something like a house as opposed to a little box. And one of the things that I learned very quickly was the space shuttle was a very complicated system. And I was very fortunate to work in different projects that helped me understand and open my eyes to complexity of systems such as spacecraft systems. But it's just not, space exploration or the military that's dealing with this. Offshore technology exploration. They're using artificial intelligence, robotics, autonomy. All different things that, and they're struggling. I know very few. I know a few people in the oil and gas industry. And they tell me how they're struggling with the systems engineering aspect of complex systems like that. Same thing with automotive. Automobiles now are becoming more and more complicated. Some of the automotive cars right now are more complex than a satellite system. Like my car's got like 16 computers on it. It's just amazing. Of course, you can't. It's hard to work on them anymore. I used to work on my own cars, and now it's very hard to work on a car because there's so much automation and electronics. And so this right here is kind of a representation of complexity. And so basically what this is trying to say that if you look at these round bubbles can be people, they can be hardware components, or they could be software components or software modules. But you notice that as the number increases in a system, how much interaction goes on. And so this basically is kind of a high-level cartoon picture representation of complexity and interaction depending on how many elements are involved in a system. And as a systems engineer, you have to be aware of this, because the more interaction, the more people involved, there is a likelihood that something can go wrong. And there's a gentleman by the name of Charles Perrow from Yale University basically was correct. It said complexity makes it likely that some essential feature will be overlooked. And very true. I mean, if you look at how much interaction is involved here, just with 8, how you could miss something. Well, think about the thousands of circles that were involved with development of the space shuttle, and not just the space shuttle and the X-shuttle tank and the solid rocket boosters, but also the launch facility. So, we're talking thousands of these circles, and all the interaction involved with all those circuits. It's just mind-boggling. And so you have to have a methodical way of dealing with these kind of systems. So systems thinking and systems engineering was critical to my career. What you're seeing here is what's called the V model. And the reason they called it the V model was because it kind of looks like a V. And so from a systems engineering standpoint, on the left-hand side of the V model, you're developing requirements. You're doing what they call systems decomposition, trying to understand what the problem is from the stakeholder. What's the goals? What's the objectives? Okay, given that, what are the requirements that we need to meet the objective and goals? And then from the requirements, what are the subsystem requirements? You may have a system requirement like the space shuttle, but you have subsystem requirements like the audio video, the command data handling system, the power and propulsion system. So you have subsystem requirements, and then you got component requirements. And so you're seeing the decomposition going on here. So the component requirements are the sub-elements of the subsystem. So you may have an audio box that has a audio amplifier. That's your component. So your audio amplifier is part of your audio subsystem, and the audio subsystem is part of the system or the shuttle. And then you have what they call the N item specification. This is what you're going to build to. This is the recipe, if you will, that manufacturing companies use to build stuff. And now you're verifying all along the way, all the different activities that you're doing along here. And then you start integrating all these components into different systems. You got all your different, let's say, for example, let's say this is the audio system. You got your audio speaker, your audio microphone, your audio power unit, and they integrate into your audio box, if you will. That audio box integrates into another subsystem, and et cetera, until you have your final system. So you have the requirements decomposition, trying to figure out what you're going to need, and then you start integrating to verify that you're building the right thing. So you're seeing here verification, and validation. Now, why verification and validation? Well, there's a difference. Verification says, did we build the system right? Okay, did we build it to the right specification? Validation means, did we build the right system? So you could have something that was built correctly, works perfect in a different temperature environment, but it was not what the customer wanted. So there's a very fine distinction between verification and validation. All right. So let me talk about human systems integration, because as I mentioned, I was part of the group that introduced the employee research group to NASA, dealing with human systems integration. So this is anything new. It's been around for a long time, and different companies use different pieces of this. But we were seeing, I say we, the engineer community at NASA, Johnson Space Center, as well as human factors, we were seeing that the focus was only on a select items of human systems integration. The Department of Defense in the United States is really big on this, because they were finding out that a lot of their costs, what we call operations costs after the system has been deployed, was dealing with things that they failed to consider early on in the design of the system. And it had to do with the human element more so than anything else. So the traditional system view, if you look on the left-hand side, was the hardware, the software, and the environment. That was considered system capability. Recall that I mentioned earlier that in engineering school, this is what we were taught. Oh, build the best hardware, build the best software, let it work in the environment, and you've got a good system. Well, that's not the case. The real view is this one on the right-hand side, called the HSI system view, where you've got the hardware, the software, the environment, and the human, the most important part. You can have hardware and software that works perfectly, does everything, but if the human cannot operate it, your whole system has failed. And so that is a very important part of human systems integration. So at NASA, we developed some domains of human systems integration that encompass the human. So we identified basically the 6 domains that relate to the human element. Starting here at the bottom, habitability environment. Obviously, you got to build a beautiful, I mean, not beautiful, but you got to build a very acceptable habitat for the astronauts. They're going to be going to Mars and Moon and what have you, and living for a long period of time. So you got to consider the habitability and the environment to make things support human health and performance. Training, you got to train the astronauts for the area that they're going to be involved with. Efficient and effective mission training system. Safety, very important, making sure that the astronauts are going to be safe. Human factors engineering, that's a biggie. That's basically ensuring that the system interaction with the human performs properly, safely, and in a satisfaction manner. Operation resources designed for flight control, meeting the crew objectives, constraints, including working with autonomous and automation systems, and maintainability and supportability. This is the one that cost NASA dearly for the space shuttle program. We did not factor a lot of maintainability and supportability. The NASA original concept of the space shuttle was they envisioned it having just about 25 people service it after return from a mission from space. In reality, it was 25,000 people because of failure to consider how things should be handled on the ground. So these are the 6, and the way it works is that you have interaction that you have to consider. So you have human factors in the center of this, interacting with training, interacting with operations, interacting with maintainability and supportability, interacting with safety, interacting with habitability and the environment. All these are going on sometimes simultaneously, making sure that each one of these areas or arms, if you will, are evolving correctly and meeting the requirements of the system. So again, very strong focus on the human element. Of course, the hardware is involved obviously to a large extent. There's something called human in the loop testing, where we have a lot of our human factors folks evaluating the system as the human is using it. Things like human error, punching the wrong button, looking at the screen incorrectly and stuff like that. Those are things that have to be factored in because we're trying to minimize human error. And of course, sometimes human error can lead to tragic consequences. As you probably heard, some of these planes that have crashed because of human error, that the pilot hit the wrong switch or something in the system was incorrect and misunderstood the ground terrain or maybe the weather conditions causing it to crash. So let me just kind of briefly talk about human space exploration missions and the Artemis program. It's going to encompass not just the moon, but Mars. And so there's critical science as part of this exploration. The moon, we need to explore the water that's been detected and further research and what's it made up of. There's a lack of dynamic surface that preserves the history of the moon impact on space rocks. Indirectly, Earth has been bombarded just like the moon has with all these rocks and stuff. But the Earth is very dynamic. You've got oceans, you've got sometimes volcanic eruptions, lava, things. It's just the Earth is the only body in our solar system that's constantly changing. It's not static like some of these other planets. So the moon is a little bit more static, and so we can learn from that because things don't get messed up and moved around a lot on the moon like on Earth. And of course, we need to learn to live on another planet. And of course, the moon is close by. I'll say a few more words later on in my presentation. Mars, even more challenging. There's a picture of the United States relative to the size of Mars. And so Mars is to determine if life ever arose on Mars. Mars is very close to what we call the Goldilocks zone in the solar system. Basically, the Goldilocks zone, I don't know if you're familiar with the story of Goldilocks and the three bears, but, she would say, oh, this porridge is too hot, this porridge is too cold, oh, this porridge is just right. And that's the Goldilocks zone. And Earth, we've been very fortunate that we're in the Goldilocks zone, but Mars has been too. So we're trying to understand what happened to Mars, that it lost its atmosphere. It used to have water. What happened to that? Characterize the climate of Mars. We still need to understand the climate of Mars, the geology of Mars, as well as preparation for human exploration of Mars. And so this is a four-phase approach to going to Mars, and I'll just briefly cover this. In phase 0, it's Earth dependent. So we're very close to Earth, and right now we're doing that using the International Space Station. We're very close to Earth. Something goes wrong, it's only a few hours away from returning astronauts safely from an emergency situation. But we're also experimenting with different kinds of technology and trying to understand how well that technology will work in space. In the lunar vicinity, phase 1 and phase 2, this is what we call somewhat of the learning to live away from Earth, but still within reach in case something goes wrong. And then the furthest one away is leaving Earth and Moon system and going out to Mars. That's the big challenge right there. And so one of the challenges is going far, far away and not having mission control involved. So this is very interesting. Right now, our current situation is we got orbiting space station, and we've got a ton of people supporting space station, seeing there's a bunch of ears and eyes on observing the space station's health. It's just not just, you only got 3 astronauts, sometimes 6, 7 astronauts on board the space station. The space station is huge, size of a football field. So there's a lot of people helping those astronauts maintain and operate the space shuttle, or rather space station. In the future, we're going to have a gateway that's going to be orbiting the moon. And to some extent, we're going to have some folks at the Johnson Space Center, Marshall Space Flight Center, even other international partners monitoring and helping out, the gateway. But as we start building more complex systems and we start moving further and further away, we're going to have to develop basically artificial intelligent onboard mission control systems to help those astronauts. So it's a far cry from what we're trying to do in the future to what we do right now. We're going to have to develop some artificial intelligence systems that basically mimic or emulate what we do with thousands of people right now supporting space station. And the bigger challenge, and of course the real challenge to some extent, is the radiation effects on electronics. We cannot fly these high performance processors that you use and hear about on the ground. Alexa, Siri, IBM Watson, they use huge amount of computing power, for speech recognition, for engine searches and stuff like that. We don't have that luxury in a deep space mission. We're constrained with power, size, and performance. And so we're going to go from a crew mission control dependent situation all the way to a crew vehicle dependency, where mission control is no longer involved in some of the real-time critical decisions. And so learning to live on our own planet is going to be important. This is a picture of, the moon and astronauts, and here's a human lander. We're going to have to learn how to live off the land, something called in situ resource utilization, using soil to extract water, and also basically preparing the soil so that we can grow plants and to grow our own food. We have to learn how to live on another planet. It's going to be vital for us to do that before we can go to Mars. We just cannot send a whole bunch of food and water to Mars because it's the amount of weight, the amount of expense is just too exorbitant to do that. And then the human needs on Mars, the physical needs. Obviously, we need water, air, food, warmth, sunshine, exercise, clothing, habitats. There's the human factors element. Staying healthy, another human factors element. Health is not just physiological, but also psychological. And then technology needs. We need to generate electricity. We need the right materials, tools, the computers, the vehicles, the fuel necessary for those vehicles to come back and forth from the moon to Earth, or from Mars to Earth, or Mars to the moon. Robots to help astronauts. And all this must be highly reliable. If they're not reliable, that's going to put a stress on the astronauts. And the stress obviously will affect them psychologically. And if you're affected psychologically, your cognitive functions are also affected, and that affects your performance and can cause human error. And then the physiological needs, you're going to have limited space, you're isolated, away from family, safety dependence on machines, group dynamics, how to interacting with all the different astronauts. You're going to have strong leadership skills in case something goes wrong. The crew selection is going to be very important. Adaptation is going to be critical for the crew to have, because they're going to have to adapt. to different situations. And of course, I consider this a big one, communication with loved ones. That's going to be a challenge. And then some final words. So don't be too busy making a living that you forget to make a life. Sometimes we get so focused on trying to get money and power, and that's understandable. But there's more to life than just money and power. And I have to say that volunteering and doing outreach activities, I don't get paid for it. But you know what? It's very beneficial and rewarding because I'm helping people. When I do these webinars for university students and I share my knowledge, very rewarding for me. Practice gratitude daily. Give back, become a mentor, do outreach, help those left behind. Helps with, it helps with your resume. And what I mean here is that sometimes you put that you do volunteer work. It may not seem important to you. You may think that your 4.0 or 3.98 GPA is more important, but you'd be surprised. At least in the United States, I've talked to many recruiters over the years, and they look for balanced people, balanced engineers. They have good technical skills, but they also need to be very strong with people. And so it says a lot about you when you do mentoring and outreach. It says a lot about your character. And to me, that sometimes means a lot more. I have worked with very, very smart people, but very hard to work with. And I've also worked with average people, but easy to work with. And I prefer sometimes working with the average people and easy to work with because it will get the job done. But working with somebody that's very arrogant, that has a very strong ego because, they were the best in school and blah, 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 very hard to work with and very hard to get a project done. Get out of your comfort zone. You may find a new beginning. Just don't, maybe just don't be an engineer. Become a rock band star or a stand-up comedian. I'm always fascinated by some engineers that I learn have a side job. My division chief, he's a mechanical engineer by training, got his master's in mechanical engineering, but he's a juggler, a professional juggler. He does that on the side, and it's really fun seeing him, juggle, especially knives and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, think about things that makes living, fun sometimes. Grades don't measure how successful you'll be in the workforce. Your ability to take what you have, learn and adapt, innovate, and get along will. And I can tell you that from my personal experience that grades don't make a person. It's your perseverance and your determination. And the best functioning teams, you can't tell who's wearing a badge. There's never this, I'm better than you, I'm older than you, I'm your boss, all this kind of stuff. At NASA, we have different badges. We have the civil servant government badge, and we got contractors that support us. And I never have waved my NASA badge to the contractors. We all are one team, and badges don't mean nothing. But what does mean is being successful in our project. And the best tools for creativity, very cheap, very simple. Paper, pencil, and a quiet environment. That's it. You can be amazed at what things you can do. You don't have to have all this technology, to be creative. And then what I found motivates me the most, I think you'll see in these pictures what motivates me the most. You notice a common theme here? These are just some of the pictures. I work with students a lot. From elementary, doing science experiments, to engineering students, and I love it. I love it. That's the part that I like, is giving back. And it's just not the United States. I've also done foreign students. Down here at the bottom, this lady, Vasudha Taran, she's from, I think, New Delhi. And she approached me many years ago that she wanted to come work for NASA. She was a high school student. And I told her it's going to be tough, working for NASA because you got to be a U.S. citizen. And she said, well, show me the path and I'm going to do it. Well, that was 5 years ago. She came to the United States. She got her bachelor's in India. but she transferred over to Syracuse University. She got her master's there. She's now working on her PhD at Caltech, I believe. And she's working with a professor that's working with NASA. And so she's getting very close to eventually coming to work for NASA. Amazing story. And that's it, folks.
That was a very exciting story. Thank you, George. So
Thank
now
you.
we'll move for a Q&A session just for 5-10 minutes. So one of the questions we have from the audience is, what is Project Artemis?
Okay, the Artemis program is okay. So back in the Apollo, if you're familiar with the Apollo program, so the Apollo program was to eventually land a human on the moon. Well, to do that, we first had to live and learn to operate in space. And so that's what the Mercury program did. It helped us to understand, can humans live and eat and work in space? Then the Gemini program for rendezvousing. How do you rendezvous two spacecrafts together on in space? It was a challenge. And then obviously all that came together with the Apollo landing. The Artemis program, interesting enough, Artemis is, I think, the sister of Apollo. So the Artemis program is very similar to the Apollo program in that the Artemis is going to go back to the moon and live and learn on the moon, gather that knowledge, and then go to Mars. And so the Artemis program is made up of living and working on the moon and eventually going to Mars. That's basically the Artemis program. And that encompasses a whole bunch of landers, launchers, gateways, orbiting space stations, transport vehicles, just a whole bunch of things. That's why we're going to have international cooperation to make this happen with the Artemis program.
Okay, so I personally had a question, which was basically what I saw from the Dragon program was that a lot of the things were automated. Like, I don't think the astronauts had to manually switch stuff. So how do you think that will impact like, do you think it's a big heading towards a fully automated system for every other flight? Or do you think it's a one-off thing for the Dragon thing?
Yeah, so for the Dragon, it's very automated, and SpaceX has a lot of experience in automating rendezvous and docking with space station. Automation works, and there's pros and cons to automation. Let's go back to the human element. So astronauts like to be busy. and so they realized that it was going to be an automated system that's going to be for a short period of time. Then they're going to get on station, and then they're going to be working. And so, but for long duration missions, there's a challenge about automation because people will get bored. And so what does that happen to them psychologically? They become depressed. I don't like using this example very well, but in the animal kingdom, if you think about, like for example, dogs. Okay, so there's a gentleman that trains dogs that have bad habits. By the name of, they call it the dog whisperer, and so sometimes when dogs are biting furniture and stuff like that, it's because they have nothing to do. And so one of the things he tells them is to take the dog for a walk, but put like 20 pounds on their back. So now they feel like they're working, like they're doing something, and interesting enough, their habits change because they feel more like they're doing something, and that's how humans are too. So automation can be good in some situations, in some situations it can't be.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that reflected upon my mind was the whole COVID situation and how all of us are apparently kind of empty because we don't have much stuff to do. So
yeah.
So the next question is, what are the ways in which NASA deals with cosmic wave protection?
That's a major challenge. The deep space radiation environment is very challenging. There's some particles that are just high energy. You cannot stop them. If you try to stop them, what happens is that you create secondary radiation effects. And so we're still looking at ways of doing that. You know, one way of doing that is using water because the water absorbs some of those energy particles. But water is very heavy. You know, 1 gallon is about 8 pounds. So, they're talking thousands of gallons. Well, we just can't afford doing that. And the alternative is maybe creating something like the Earth's magnetic field. And if it wasn't for the Earth's magnetic field, I think life as we know it would be dead. Interesting enough, the Earth, that's what exoplanet searchers look for, is magnetic fields in other planets. So that tells them that there's a high likelihood that life is developing on that planet because it's protecting the planet from radiation effects. But to go back to that question, we're still looking at ways of inexpensively and with not a whole bunch of weight, developing some kind of radiation protection. It's still a challenge.
Okay. So that's one for the future, I guess. So the next question is, what are the astronaut training procedures, equipment right now as compared to previously and the future?
The training procedures pretty much are the same. Okay, so the training equipment typically is the system that they're going to actually use. And so when I talked earlier about the human in the loop testing, that basically involves the astronauts are going to be using the system and the what we call the flight life system that they're going to use. And so that's very important to have the highest fidelity of training for the astronauts. The more they train, the more it'll be easier for them to use the system when they go into space. What's going to change in the future is how we train astronauts, because one thing that's we are thinking about, and especially the Human Health and Performance Group are thinking about, is that when they're training, they're in a more comfortable environment. They're on Earth, they know they're going to train. Afterwards, they go home, have a beer, whatever, blah, blah, blah. In space, things are, they're away from all that. And so the training the training that we're going to have to develop is going to have to be more realistic. Somehow we're going to have to figure out how to create that environment that they actually see on Earth. There's something called space fog. Space fog is associated with what happens to them in space. That they become, like one astronaut told me, we become brain dead because there's so many things happening, and they're realizing, hey, we're no longer on Earth. We are in space, and we better make the right decisions here. Otherwise, it's going to be a bad day. And so we're going to have to think differently about these deep space missions, because it's not going to be like we do now. They train astronauts, they go away for 6 months, they come back. Mars, they're going to go away for 3 years. And so they're going to have some way of training all during that time. So a much more challenging situation. And right now, the human factors, human health and performance folks associated with human systems integration are looking at that.
Okay, we have a question which asks for your thoughts on the Indian space program.
I think it's great that you all have an Indian space program. I think you guys are looking at human space flight as well, and we certainly welcome that, because I think you guys eventually can join us in going to the moon and Mars. It's going to have to be going to Mars. It's going to have to be an international effort, no question about it. And so I think it's great you guys are doing that. It's obviously instilling excitement for the students, that there's an opportunity to go, work for the space program. my hats off to you guys for getting involved with space and one day making a difference, not only for India but for the world.
The next question is how is NASA planning to protect astronauts on the moon from asteroid bombardment and create energy at the same time from the solar panels?
Well, that's a tough one. The astronauts, the moon gets bombarded with small particles and large particles. Unfortunately, we're not going to have an opportunity to detect everything that's in space that's going to hit the moon, and so it's a risk. Okay, so here's the thing about NASA programs. There's what they call the four-legged stool. There's cost issues or challenges. There's cost challenges, schedule challenges, technical challenges, risk challenges. Risk is a big one. We have to accept the risk, and like they say, you can't. What's that analogy they talk about? You cannot learn what's on the other side of the ocean by staying at the shore. You got to go out. You got to go out, and we're going to take all the precautions we can. Solar panels, yeah, they're probably going to get hit, maybe destroyed or partially destroyed. But that's part of the planning. That's part of the what's called the maintenance and operations of human systems integration. Is how are we going to keep something operating for a long period of time? That's one of the major challenges. We can no longer think, we're just going to go there for a few days and we're going to come home and that's it. It's not going to be like that. We're going to be there for a long period of time. And, just like the early explorers on Earth, they would get on their covered wagons. They would put all their tools and food and whatever they had and went out and they learned to live off the land. And that's what we're going to have to do is learn to live off the land. We may have to build caves to protect the astronauts in case they know that there's an incoming asteroid that's been detected.
The next question is about the space junk in the orbit of the Earth. So how does that affect the International Space Station and space launches?
Space junk is becoming a big problem, and it's starting to become more challenging. I know that the shuttle used to have to do a lot of maneuvering to get away from space junk, because this stuff is coming at them at 17,500 miles an hour. So space stations have to make a few evasive maneuvers in space to get away from space junk. Now, in 1959, when they signed the treaty for space, part of that treaty was supposed to have been, hey, you launch your stuff, you clean up after yourself. Basically, I'm just kind of simplistically saying that, but it hasn't happened. A lot of things have gone wrong, and so satellites have died in space. Many satellites have died in space where they weren't supposed to, and then there were collisions between satellites, and that created more debris. So it's a major challenge, and as we start launching more and more satellites, like SpaceX just launched, I forget, 100 satellites the other day, and I think I can't remember what country launched a whole bunch of CubeSats. So that's just more and more junk, and I'm hoping that somebody develops a commercial garbage collection company, and they are going to make some big bucks because there's a lot of garbage to clean up in space.
The next question is about do you think there will be a space elevator anytime soon on either Earth or the moon to reduce space junk?
Space elevator is an interesting concept. I just don't see that happening anytime soon on Earth. Maybe on the moon, because of the less of the gravitational effects as well as weather conditions. Imagine a space elevator that is caught up near where earthquake happens, or a hurricane, or a typhoon, or something like that, and destroys it. And so, there's some challenges because of, again, going back to the Earth, very dynamic. The features of the Earth continually changing, and so I think I would rather build one on the Moon and learn to use that on the Moon rather than on Earth.
Okay. The next question is about ion propulsion systems in airspace. Do you think they will be used in the future?
I'm sorry, you kind of broke up a little bit. Can you say that again?
Yeah, sure. So the next question was about ion propulsion systems in airspace. So do you think ion propulsion systems will be used in the future?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Is that it? Was that a bad word?
Okay,
Yeah.
so maybe I didn't capture the question. Can you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, it was about ion propulsion systems in airspace.
About what now?
Ion propulsion systems.
Oh, ion propulsion systems.
Yeah.
Okay, so they work for small satellites, but to use on a large spacecraft that houses astronauts and equipment and stuff, we're talking about some very, very big ion engines. And I'm just not sure, I'm not a propulsion guy, I'm just not sure it's feasible at this point in time. One of the things they're looking at right now is nuclear powered, electric power propulsion, and also the Vasimir, which is from a former astronaut, Dr. Franklin Chang Diaz, dealing with plasma propulsion. Again, you're talking about heavy things being launched into space, going long distances, and so far the ion engine has been tested on what I consider very small objects, and so it's still not there yet. Not for human spaceflight. Not at this point in time.
So the next question is about how does NASA plan on keeping the astronauts fit so that they can reach Mars in their best shape? And I would like to add, like, especially the gravity thing. I think that's being researched a lot. So what are your thoughts on that?
And gravity for long duration missions is going to be a challenge. And right now on station, the longest we've had astronauts in space has been just a little over a year. But they come back, they have a lot of issues. Microgravity affects, the blood flow affects the brain, affects the eyes, affects everything. And so, if we're going to go into deep space, we're going to have to develop some kind of artificial gravity to keep them healthy. Because if they were to land on Mars and they're not feeling well, or all kinds of medical issues, the mission may be compromised. So. There's been talk about artificial gravity, rotating spacecraft at a certain rate and things of that sort. Well, yeah, the idea is very attractive. It's been around for a long period of time. But here's the thing: from a reliability standpoint, any mechanical system can fail, and so you have to build a reliable mechanical system that's going to be able to operate without an issue for a long period of time. And it's very hard to test something that massive on the ground. Sometimes we call test as you fly as you test. So in other words, you try to test on the ground just like it's going to happen in space. But one that we cannot do very well is microgravity. And so you cannot test a very large artificial gravity system on Earth because of the 1G. So we're going to have to find different ways of doing that, and also how reliable that's going to be. I mean, we're talking about something massive, rotating very slowly, and of course you see, Star Trek and all these shows, these massive systems and like that, and I always think, oh man, that's like $15 trillion, and it's going to be very costly.
So one question I had was, going forward, how does NASA foresee the private space market to the public space market? So like, how much contribution do they expect?
Oops, you broke up. You're breaking up.
So I was asking, like, how much contribution does NASA expect from the private space market, and what things will specifically like be for only NASA, and what will be for the private market in the future?
Well, NASA's getting more and more. If you look at what's going on with the Artemis program, we've basically already issued out some contracts with private space companies to help develop hardware systems for the Artemis program, especially the moon human landers. There's going to be more and more involvement now with commercial industry, which is great. I have to say, I am working with SpaceX right now with Crew Dragon, and I have to admire their engineering strategies. They're very agile. They're very quick to make corrections, and they give us a lot of creative people and have a creative environment. They work a lot of hours, but some people enjoy that. A friend of mine told me sometimes if you're going to work at SpaceX, you better be single. But anyway, they have very good. I think the commercial sector is going to be very beneficial for NASA. NASA can no longer do a lot of this stuff that we used to be able to do. We don't have the workforce, for one, and then the second thing is we got too many things going on. So we need help, and the space and the commercial industry is going to help there.
There's a question about, does NASA have any projects underway to send probes to Europa or Titan, which have, I think, previously shown signs of being habitable?
I think there's plans to send one to, if I'm not mistaken, Europa. They're looking at a robotic submarine to go underwater and see what's under there. Because anytime there's water, there's possibility of some kind of life form. And so, but what does it look like? Is it small? Maybe it's microscopic. We don't know. So we need to figure out how to explore other worlds that have water, like Europa. And I know there's some drawings on the board for a mission to Europa.
So the next question is, how does NASA train astronauts for zero gravity environments while they're on Earth?
Well, okay, so here's another. That's the issue. They used to train astronauts using the Vomit Comet, which was a KC-135 that did parabolas, and every time it was dropping, the jet was dropping down, created a microgravity, and that's what microgravity is all about. That you're falling. And in fact, that's what the stations on space station or the space shuttle, you see these astronauts floating. It's really that it's not they're floating, that they're falling. Everything is falling around an orbit. And so trying to do that on the ground is very difficult. The only way we can do that is using the the airplane, bomb atomic KC-135, but you can only create microgravity for about 18 seconds, and that's what they do, like 20, 30 parabolas, to get enough time, and maybe sometimes they're testing something out that can only be tested in a microgravity environment. The only way to do that right now is to fly them on the KC-135 airplane. There's nothing on the ground right now that you can walk into a room and all of a sudden you start floating. Of course, there's something here called I think they call it Zero G, and it's a commercial company that basically creates a microgravity environment by having a bunch of fans pushing you up. And so, you're being pushed up by these fans. And so it feels like you're floating, but you're not. You're falling, but the force of air equals your weight. And so it basically looks like you're floating around, but you're actually falling. Very difficult. I mean, you can't. Some experiments you cannot do that because of the airflow, and so it's a very challenging to create a microgravity environment.
We have a couple of questions about different missions. Yeah. Do you want to take a break for 1 minute or something?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Do you want to take a 30-second break before the next?
We're breaking up.
Okay, I'll just continue to the next
Yeah.
question. So the next question is, how feasible is the breakthrough Starshot program? That is the light sails to Proxima Centauri b, which is an Earth-sized planet in the Goldilocks zone.
Okay, to go to Proxima Centauri b, that's a long way. Yeah, we need to be looking at that, and we are. We're looking at exoplanets. There's a lot of astronomers. That's where the scientist comes into play. Astronomers out there looking at other exoplanets and trying to understand what's outside of our solar system. Space is huge. If you look at how long it took for Voyager 1 and 2 to get out of our solar system, it took a long time. The Voyagers were launched in the 1970s, and they just recently got out of our solar system. And so Alpha Centauri b is even much, much further away. Traveling at the speed of light, it takes 5 years to get there. So we can't do that. We don't have the technology for doing that. We don't have the warp 1 through warp 10 warp vector that they use on space Star Trek, to get to other parts of the universe very quickly. We got the human exploration here close in the vicinity of the moon and Mars, but we also have the telescopes looking out into deep space and trying to understand what's outside of our solar system. Huge is just, space is just huge. It's mind-boggling, and so, but we got to have that. We got to have that, and so understanding other solar systems and potential for other planets that potentially could be in the Goldilocks zone is important. But the thing is, here's the important thing is that we need to start asking questions of Goldilocks zones for us may be different than Goldilocks zones for other for other life forms in other solar systems. In other words, what I'm saying is that we can't assume, that's a bad word, assumption. We can't assume that life everywhere is just like us. It may be different. And so that's the key, have an open mind to look at different options and just not everybody's carbon, all human life form is carbon. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's based on some other molecular structure that we don't know about.
Okay, so we'll just take like 2-3 final questions. One is about the James, so any details on the James Webb Space Telescope, which got recently postponed again?
Well, right now, I heard that it's been postponed because of this COVID virus thing. A lot of people working on it can't work on it. So it's going to get delayed. I'm not sure. I don't keep up with it because, again, that's a unmanned space exploration that's headed out of Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland, in the United States, and so they deal with satellites. But I did have the privilege and opportunity to witness it being tested at the Johnson Space Center because they had to use the 60-foot thermal vacuum chamber that we have there to test. They were testing it for 2 months, but yeah, it's. I look forward to it when it actually gets deployed because it's going to teach us a lot about deep space. It's going to be able to go further back in time as opposed to Hubble Space Telescope. Right now, the earliest we can go back in time is 14 billion years, roughly. Supposedly, James Webb is going to take us even further back. So I'm looking forward to that.
Okay, so second last question. How are we dealing with space mining and harnessing fuels from different planets?
Well, I mean, right now we're going to have to learn what does that mean just for the moon. Forget other planets. I mean, we're going to have to learn how to do that on the moon. And, we got actually commercial companies are interested in doing that. But here again, from an engineering standpoint, you're talking about machines. You just think about, I'm sure in India or other countries, you see these large machines digging soil and all this kind of stuff. Well, those machines can handle, dirt and all that kind of stuff, and they're very powerful. That's not the case for going to the moon. Weight, size are going to be limitation. Power consumption is going to be a limitation. So these drilling machines are not going to be as powerful as what we have here on Earth. And so how are we going to do that? I don't know. But I can tell you that the digging on the moon and digging on Mars is a major challenge because that stuff, that soil, is very abrasive. Think of glass crunched down into a powder, very sharp, very abrasive, and that's what the moon and Mars soil is like.
All right. So I think that's pretty much most of the questions. Anyone has any last questions they want to ask? I think that's it. So thank you very much for joining us, George. And thank you very much for your time, everyone else as well. So.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. It was a pleasure chatting with you guys. And if they took away just one item and learned one thing, I did my mission.
Yeah, we definitely learned more than one thing. It was
okay. Well, y'all have a good day then.
Yeah.
Thank you, George.
Thank you.